President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I ask consent that Senator Bennet and I...
We're in a quorum call, sir.
Oh, Mr. President, I ask consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
I ask consent that Senator Bennet and I have up to 10 minutes for a colloquy.
Without objection. How would the time be allotted, sir?
Up to 10 minutes.
Up to 10 minutes.
Yeah. Mr. President, Senator Bennet and I have just announced an effort that I think most teachers, most principals, many parents will want to be a part of. We're going to look at the education system in Tennessee and Colorado, two of the more progressive states in education, to see if there are too many tests and too many regulations. We want to make sure that the tests we have are good tests, the regulations we have are reasonable tests, and any minute that we can save from an unneeded test or an unnecessary regulation is a minute a teacher can spend devoted to teaching. So we've done two things. One, we are introducing today legislation that we hope will be a part of the new Elementary and Secondary Education Act when it's passed, that will have the Education Secretary set up a task force that would do something we don't usually do in government, which is subtract instead of add government. In other words, to continuously ask teachers, principals, and others what tests, what regulations are unnecessary so that we can get rid of them. Second, we're going to start right away to do this in Colorado and Tennessee. We've talked to our governors, Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Haslam, and we're going to put together a task force of educators in our state and ask them to say to us what regulations are unnecessary, what tests are unnecessary. When I was governor, I used to say to the Education Secretary, who was then Bill Bennett, there are too many federal regulations. He would say to me, I'll bet you've got more state regulations than federal regulations, and he was right. And when I was Education Secretary, I had many teachers and others say to me, we can't do this, we can't do that because of a federal regulation, when in fact, there was no such federal regulation. What often happens is that the confusion between what the federal government requires and what the state government requires creates inordinate confusion in the classroom, and teachers feel all tied up. So we're going to start right away to do this. We're both very excited about this. We think this should give teachers and others in the classroom an opportunity to do their jobs. You know, one day less on an unneeded test might mean one more day teaching a child United States history, which would suit me fine. I want to congratulate Senator Bennet for his contribution to the debate. His ideas come from the experience of an extraordinarily successful superintendent of the Denver public school system. So we're taking his more recent experience and my own background, putting them together with our teachers and principals, and we'll look forward to reporting to our colleagues what we find, as well as to Secretary Duncan, who will be a full partner in this with us, and we hope this is part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act when it is enacted in a bipartisan way by this Congress.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Alexander for his leadership over so many years on education issues confronting this country and making sure that every child in America has the opportunity to fulfill their full potential, and for his work on this bipartisan effort to do something very, very unusual for government and also for public education, which is actually to begin an inquiry about not what the next rule should be, not what the next regulation should be, but whether there are rules and regulations that are now obsolete, or whether our state regulations and our federal regulations are actually not accounting for each other in any way other than to overburden the people that are actually teaching our kids and our kids themselves. You know, I used to spend a lot of time when I was the superintendent of Denver Public Schools wondering why everyone in Washington was so mean to our teachers and so mean to our kids. And now that I've been here a couple years, I know that people here aren't mean. But this Senate floor is a very long way from the classrooms in this country, very long way from the classrooms in Tennessee, a long way from the classrooms in Colorado. And we have to remember what the effects are of everything we do on that moment when a teacher is in her classroom with 20 or 30 kids and is trying to do her best to make sure they move forward. So this is an opportunity to not show up with the answers, but to ask questions of our teachers and our principals and our moms and our dads and see what kinds of things we can take away. I've learned something since I've been here, which is that an awful lot of the burden that we're placing on people in our schools and our classrooms is the way in which state and federal regulations interact with each other. And if we can reduce that burden while at the same time elevating our accountability system, improve our accountability system, make sure we're holding everybody accountable for delivering for outcomes for our kids, that not only will we get better results, but we're going to find out that there's a lot more time in the school day and the school year for kids to have a well-rounded education all across America. So I want to thank our former Education Secretary for his work. I want to thank our current Education Secretary, Arne Duncan, for working with us on this initiative. And I'm just so looking forward to having a conversation with people where we're saying, what can we take away, rather than what are we going to impose on you next?
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I'd like to ask consent to include in the record a memorandum on the Colorado-Tennessee Working Group on Effective Regulation and Assessment Systems for Public Education, which outlines the roles that Senator Bennet and I and Secretary Duncan, along with Governor Haslam of Tennessee and Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, will have.
Without objection, sir.
And if I may just say one more time what I think the bottom line of this proposal by Senator Bennet and me is, every minute that a teacher spends on an unneeded test or regulation is a minute that the teacher cannot devote to teaching a child. So what we are asking the teachers of Tennessee and Colorado to do for us is to identify the rules and regulations that we need and the rules and regulations that we can get rid of.
Senator from
I just want to add one more example just from
Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just from the experience in Denver. You know, we complied with No Child Left Behind in the Denver public schools, but there was something that really didn't make sense to me and didn't make sense to our teachers and didn't make sense to our families, which is we thought we were asking and answering a completely irrelevant question when it came to accountability, which was, how did this year's fourth graders do compared to last year's fourth graders? You know, the accountability system all across the United States is based on that. And what our teacher said to me was, Michael, it's irrelevant because they're not the same kids, and they're right. And so we moved to a system that asked the question, how did this group of fifth graders do compared to how they did as fourth graders, compared to how they did as third graders, and compared to how every other child in the state of Colorado with a statistically similar test history did as well. All of a sudden, we began to see places that were actually driving growth for kids, but that were completely unrecognized by the federal law. And we saw other places where kids were achieving at high levels, but were falling behind during the course of the year. There is a lot of wisdom out there in this country about how to move our kids forward. And what we've got to do, I think, is tear down some of the barriers in the way of those good ideas. It took me a long, long time to get that performance system signed off on, at both the state and the federal level. Now the state of Colorado has a growth model, and we're talking about growth models all over the country as a result of the work we did in Colorado and good work that's been done in other states as well. Sometimes people ask, why is it so hard to scale quality in public education? And if we can, in some small way, tear down some of the unintended barriers to that scaling of quality education, I think our kids will be the better for it. So again, I want to thank the Senator from Tennessee for signing up on this initiative. I look forward to learning with him what's working well and what's not working so well in our two respective states, and then watching this spread across the United States. Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.